So 4 years ago, I can't remember if you were at this one, Alex or Roz, we did a Christmas show at the Leicester Square Theatre just after the 2019 election. Were any of you here then?
I think we were both on that.
Yeah, right. It was vibes. And then we were talking about a Tory landslide, the Johnson hegemony.
Except me, thank you.
Right.
It's true.
And people were so fucking patronising afterwards. They were like, "Oh, it's nice that you found a silver lining to keep us cheerful."
What was your silver lining?
That, you know, people like Johnson basically burn themselves out quite quickly.
Yeah,
so,
well, there was much talk about how Labour would take a very long time to come back.
Yeah.
But now look. None of the party leaders from that election are still in frontline politics, by the way.
oh, that's interesting.
None of them have been in Parliament. Nigel Farage, to be fair, was never in Parliament. So no change there. The Shadow Cabinet had now been told to get their ducks in a row for a spring election. So a Labour government could be just around the corner. I don't know if there's going to be one. I don't know if they've been tipped off or they just want to be, you know, match ready. So we're going to talk about what we're expecting from the campaign and the first year of Labour rule, and who will we make fun of? Because it's very pressing. I don't really care about the country, but for podcasting, it's actually quite difficult because, you know, Johnson, Braverman, you know, what material. James, in that Telegraph column that caused a fuss, Starmer cited the watershed elections of 1945, 1979 and 1997 when people were desperate for change. Do you think that there is potential for this to sort of herald a new era, and does it depend on what Labour say, and you know, if they get their, you know, ramp up the hope and not so much the caution?
First of all, I think the Telegraph column was quite clever. In retrospect, I think he's doing quite a lot of clever things that people like.
You would say that you love Keith.
I do love Keith.
Maggie.
I love Keith. But he's doing a lot of things that upset people like me at first glance. And then you realise that actually he's probably being a little bit more intelligent than any of us are used to seeing a political leader be in this country. So I mean, you talk about the speed or the length of the Labour comeback. Everyone was expecting 2 terms. Even if Johnson didn't survive, you were certainly not expecting it to fall apart quite as quickly or quite so spectacularly. And the reason why Labour are benefiting, because it's very easy to say, oh, he's just benefiting from the Tories falling apart. But there are Labour leaders in living memory who would not have benefited from the Tories falling apart, who would have just been lumped into the same skip as whoever was actually in government. And the reason, the way in which he's done that is by detaching himself completely from what went before and by appealing quite calmly and quite measuredly to people who in 2019 would have cut off their leg before they voted for the Labour Party. And one way of doing that is speaking about Margaret Thatcher without immediately pulling out garlic and a crucifix. And that's all he did. So I had a caller on my show who said I've voted Labour since 1945. It may not have been quite that long ago. And now, after those Thatcher comments, I'm never going to vote for Labour again. And there are lovely moments on the radio where you think I'm going to throw my maggot into the river at this point because I think he's going to bite. And I said, "Did you read the actual article?" And he said, "I thought you only pulled apart racists like this on your..." No, he didn't. I said, "Did you read the actual article?" And he said, "No, I didn't." So I read it to him. And he said, "Oh, all right then." So that's why I think I even think perhaps getting chased down the street by pro-Palestinian protesters whose point I largely agree with. I think that works well for Starmer because the kind of people that the Tories try and portray him as still being in hock to or in bed with are the kind of people that are attacking Starmer on television screens and in newspaper pages. But the big question then is how quick and how swinging will change be when he gets in. And I'm always reminded of that line in Clockwise that the John Cleese character delivers about despair, saying, "I can cope with the despair I can deal with." It's the hope. It's the hope that gets you. On the plus side, it cannot possibly be worse. On the minus side, what sort of expectations is he going to arrive in Downing Street with? And again, I think he's really managing that. And I think on the occasions when I've interviewed him in person, he's different in broadcast formats. That's a problem he's got. The last 3 weeks at PMQs, I think he's improved on that stiffness that he has in public sometimes. But when you interview him in person on a stage, for example, which I've done, there's a warmth and a humanity and a humour there that doesn't come across. But what also comes across is a very real sense of duty, which is absolutely absent from politics at the moment. It has been probably for 13 years. It's exactly what Alex was talking about when Alex talked about just a sense. When they asked David Cameron why he wanted to be Prime Minister, and he said, I think I'd be rather good at it. And you just go, Christ on a bike, the entitlement that you would have to have lived with all your life. And I think Sunak's probably the same. Sunak's ticked off all these things in his life. Head boy, captain of the debating society, made a lot of money, married a billionaire's daughter. It's all ticking to Prime Minister next. Yes, I'll tick that off as well. Starmer wants to be Prime Minister because he wants to improve the country in which he lives and which he clearly loves. And I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt for at least 2.5 hours.
Alex, I think, didn't you come up with a really good slogan for the Labour election campaign on the podcast?
I think so, and then they nicked some of it. I think they did adopt some of it.
Did they? Are they listening to our podcast? Are they really listening to our podcast?
Yes, I think it was
stealing things?
Rebuild, repair, renew. That was my thing.
Oh, that's good.
It's pretty good.
I like that.
Still holds up magnificently 2 months later.
What would you run on if you were Starmer, if you were a Labour strategist? It's like, what do you think, sensing the mood in the country? I mean, beyond like, get these fuckers out. That's the subtext. But what's the text?
So, I would be tempted to actually not run on any policy thing, to run on values, to show my workings, basically, because I think, for 2 reasons, I think people have been so burnt in the last few years, anything you promise, no one believes it anyway. They just think, oh yeah, we'll see. And it gives a target for, people out there to be going, well, how are you going to fund this, And the second is that it feels to me like the pandemic and Ukraine have really shown people that whatever your plan is, it's out the window on day one. You will have to deal with completely different circumstances to what you imagined. And so I think it would be more useful for people to know how will you make your decisions? Like, what do you prioritize? What are your red lines? Is it, healthcare free at the point? Is it, better education, housing? What are your aspirations rather than I will build 100,000 new homes on year one, which nobody believes. I mean, people have become so jaded by that.
When you're in opposition, people are always just like, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? When you're in government, you can spend hundreds of millions of pounds on not sending people to Rwanda.
Yeah.
And it's just like...
and no one questions where it's coming from. Well, because we know where it's coming from, our taxes. So I would be or I would make my only policy like a root and branch reform of the political system. I would say, it will be basically a commission on the electoral system, do away with hereditary peerages, review the way life peerages are awarded, more devolution, deal with lobbying, deal with dark money, deal with think tanks, do all of that stuff, because I think you'd have to do that to get to a stage where you could promise stuff to people and they wouldn't go, pull the other one.
Rod, some people in this room may have fond feelings towards... you and your applause lines. Some people may have fond feelings towards the continent of Europe and its inhabitants.
What?
Do you think that Starmer will mention Europe and Brexit in any way in the campaign, or is that still too scary?
No, he won't. No, he won't. I hate to tell you this, guys, but he doesn't need us, right? He really doesn't need us to win. He's got us on board already. He doesn't need our support, and that is why he does not need to mention Europe and Brexit. Plus, at the moment, to be honest, Europe is not in a great place. And I say this.
Same place it always was.
Yeah. I say this cautiously because there's a lot of love for Europe in this room, and I share it, of the European Union. But they've just had to hand billions to Viktor Orban to persuade him to let them send aid to Ukraine. And in a way, I bet a part of Starmer is thinking, thank God I'm not having to negotiate in that room and do those things. There is, it's a difficult place for the EU at the moment. And yeah, of course, we all here want to rejoin, I imagine, or at the very least, maybe the single market, the customs union. But it's what we will have, undoubtedly, once he gets in, is a sophisticated, mature relationship with the European Union, which is going to be great. And we will, we saw that when he talked to the Greek Prime Minister when Rishi Sunak had his little tantrum and said that he wouldn't. And that's going to be very refreshing. But will he talk about it during the campaign? No, I don't think he will. And I actually agree with Alex that he can more or less run a vibes-based campaign, and you shouldn't underestimate a vibes-based campaign. I mean, I was thinking today because I was doing a bit of research on Australia. And 1972, Gough Whitlam, the Australian Labour Party, ran with the slogan, "It's time." Okay, now when you can win an election on a slogan like that, and he turned out to be a really reforming, radical Prime Minister, albeit he got kicked out very quickly, but he achieved a lot in the short time he was there.
And that slogan is considered one of the best political slogans of all time.
It is, yeah.
It's time. I always like when people talk about leading people into the future as if there is another option. The other party are just going, we're going to go backwards. It's going to be pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Who knows where we're going to end up?
That's what Jacob Rees-Mogg does.
Yeah, you'll run with a
On his penny farthing, cycling as fast as he can.
With the slogan, "Death, take me now."
Wrong gear, it's reverse.
So, James, let's fast forward. Let's imagine that they've won. And essentially what the Tories will be saying is, here's Britain, sorry we broke it. Where would you start? Like, of all the things that seem to not be working?
Oh, I'd have liked some notice of this question.
You are now in charge of Britain. You can't just talk on the radio now. You've got to fix things.
I think it's a dreadful phrase, but you've got to identify achievable goals, haven't you? So you've got to do stuff that people will feel the difference of, feel the impact of. I suspect that negotiating with the railway unions, or at least ensuring that the rail providers negotiate with the railway unions, would sort of de-constipate the transport network at the moment. I'd prioritise that, I think, because anyone who's tried to travel anywhere by train in the last 6 months or so has had apocalyptic experiences. You can't. There's two things that have struck me recently about being a sort of punter. You walk into supermarkets and there is not as much food on the shelves. I don't care what anybody says, I don't care what anybody claims or how it's a Remainer myth, it's just true. You speak to someone who's been away for a few years and then comes back. I spoke to a chap in Padua today who came back to see his mum in North Wales last week. He couldn't believe that the empty space, there did not used to be empty spaces on supermarket shelves as a matter of course. You went shopping with your shopping list, it never crossed your mind that you wouldn't find everything on it, except, I don't know, in Alex's case, probably saffron or something. But your basic shopping, you'd never think, oh, I'm going to have to pop to Tesco's now because I couldn't find it in Sainsbury's. I don't know what he can do about that in the first instance, but the Windsor Agreement needs tweaking. But he can certainly sort out transport. And the way the question was framed, my lud, only demanded that I come up with one answer.
That's fine. Roz, is housing like one obvious area to focus on? Obviously, it takes a while to build a house. I'd imagine. I haven't built one. But it's not something that's going to kind of pay off immediately. But is that because that seems to be actually the one where there is complete cross-party consensus, not about how to do it, but the fact that it needs to be done.
Well, I say it takes longer than it does to confiscate a tent, put it that way. But it took you a while to get that one.
No, I got it. I was just loving the room. It was like a slow hiss. It was like a broken gas fire.
I heard that noise. That was good.
I know.
Yeah, like Alex, housing is great, but they need to avoid getting bogged down in figures because there's been one single figure that has been the promise of delivering on house building, and it's always 300,000 new houses a year. Every single government for the last, I think, decade or so has promised to build 300,000 new houses each year, and they never have. So, like you say, there's no point in that. What I think will actually happen is one of the earliest things, and I think this also feeds into what James was saying about getting the rail unions particularly on side, is a big, the new workers' rights reforms that Angela Rayner is spearheading. And there will probably be a ban on 0 hours contracts, for example, and all kinds of things that basically, make the British labour market infinitely flexible, apparently, but also extremely mean it relies heavily on migration and mean that it's, screws over large numbers of workers. And that is very, very important to Labour. It's very important to Labour's funders, the unions, and it's an easy win in terms of Starmer fending off the criticism that he was bound to get, that he is already getting from the left, saying, you're not left-wing enough, here you are in power, what are you doing for the workers? And it means passing a ton of legislation, which will be relatively easy to do, I think, given that he's likely to have, fingers crossed, a decent majority. And it fits very much with both Starmer's. Starmer is all about respect, and in particular, respect for the working man. That's the whole thing. When he talks about his father being a toolmaker and how he was disrespected. Yeah, I know he has. How he never got the respect he deserved. Yeah,
that's true.
What did his mum do?
She was a nurse.
She was a nurse.
In the
I just thought of the donkey.
Yeah.
The donkey sanctuary.
Yeah, the donkey sanctuary. But it's very, for a start, he's a lawyer, so he understands the power of the law to change things in this regard. And he's all about respecting, and particularly respecting working people. And so I think he will run a very vibes-based campaign on respect. And then the first thing that we'll see is a big investment in this. Now, there's a bit of a pitfall here. Because what's happened in Britain recently is that there are rules, for example, about illegal working, but they're not enforced. And hardly anyone, like a handful of people each year, get prosecuted for treating their workers badly. It's just not enforced. There's no money in it. There's no decent inspecting going on. And Starmer, better than anybody, I would have thought, as a former director of public prosecutions, because he used to do that as well. Yeah. He ought to know that better than anyone, that it's all very well passing laws, but you've got to enforce them. And you can't have a fantastic set of workers' rights laws for people who are working, in regulated professions. But then there's a whole, I won't say underclass because that's patronising, but there's a whole other world of people who are slaving away in a completely unregulated environment. So that's going to be a real risk, and he has to tackle that as well.
So, Alex, this stuff will be music to Rachel Reeves' ears because it doesn't really cost much, whether it's, changing planning regulations, toughening up workers' rights. But at some point, there are certain things that need to be done where she's just going to have to get spendy. Like, is she sort of, do you think that's one of those ones where, I think we were joking about stage that as soon as they got in the door, they were just going to unveil a bust of Lenin and go, fooled you. Unlikely. But considering that once you're in office, you're allowed to just spend. Like, people don't suddenly go, how much is that going to cost? They just go, the government's doing it. I guess they found the money. Is that something that you're expecting, that there is certain
completely. They will spend money.
Yeah,
absolutely. They will spend money. And they will spend money because the so-called fiscal rules are an entirely self-defined, self-imposed thing anyway. everyone's talking about the headroom Hunt found in the recent budget, and that was like some projection came in slightly lower for borrowing a little less money in 5 years' time. So he's like, oh, that's good, I can spend that. So yeah, she will spend, and she will spend because in the meantime, the Conservative Party will be a bin fire. So they will have no opposition effectively for the first year.
my hands around
Genuinely. They will have a year where they can do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah.
That's basically the bottom line.
This is where the Braverman's going to be like running around screaming with their hair on fire.
And the massive mistake that the Blair government did is that they didn't take advantage of precisely that period. So then they had to be a little bit more careful. And I think that lives in the muscle memory of the Labour Party. And they know that if they come in and they come in with a big majority, those first 100 days are absolutely key. People have to feel and see the money being spent to fix the country. And if that happens, you establish yourself for 2-3 terms.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't happen, it's very difficult to reverse that first impression. But they'll do it. They will do it. I love the idea that you thought Keir Starmer's mother was a professional donkey sanctuarist, by the way. So that was like her main deal.
So that's somebody's main deal.
Of course it is.
Okay, I forget things.
So does Rishi Sunak.
I do not recall. Yeah, I should have just said, I'm sorry, I do not recall. I have no recollection of my recollection. That's what it is. James, which shadow ministers impress you? Are you sort of excited about?
I don't know that I'm excited.
Come on, mate, you spent 10 minutes on the show reading a Telegraph article.
Yes. It was only 2 lines. I didn't read the whole article.
All right, okay. Sorry, I thought that must have been a riveting 5 minutes of radio.
1.5 million listeners. I'm doing something right.
Sales?
No, I can't complain. Do you really want to know? Because I'm happy to know. Just, I think, week 6 in the top 20 on Amazon this week. But anyway, and a lot more than the plot, which is particularly satisfying.
What I love about James is that the success hasn't changed.
Thank you. Very true.
Son of a toolmaker, very humble.
No. He really was this much of a twat 10 years ago.
James, changing the subject mercifully.
Ministers.
Who do you like?
Ministers. I can't say I like all of them. I think Streeting is the most interesting. I think that he is the one that seems to be pushing. I said interesting. I think there are going to be. I mean, to pardon a fairly awful pun, but there is going to be some serious medicine that needs to be taken. I think we have quite an emotional attachment to the NHS in its historical and traditional form, and I'm not sure it is sustainable. And if Wes Streeting can provide a transparent and comprehensible account of why some fairly meaningful and profound changes need to be undertaken and why they will be undertaken, then that is infinitely preferable to sort of backdoor privatisation and covert selling off. And I think from what I have seen of him, he is not frightened of that challenge. Now, health is probably, after the Home Office, it's probably the most poisoned chalice of all, isn't it? And it's done for more politicians, at least in the short term, than any other department. But Streeting he is up for it. And I'll tell you that despite having some issues with some of the pronouncement that he's made, seeing a politician that is really up for it and is absolutely across their brief and is, I think, determined to make meaningful change from day one, you have to cross your fingers, because you can't leave things as they are. The health service, as we're about to see, and the now traditional, comes earlier every year, doesn't it? The Christmas crisis in the National Health Service. Something serious has to change, and it can't just be leaving everything exactly as it is and shoveling yet more money in the direction of the health service. It just can't be that. So I don't know that I'm excited by him, but I'm most interested in how Wes Streeting is going to perform. And I think Rachel Reeves has been extraordinary in her transformation. I think watching a politician grow in stature, obviously opposition is very different from government, but to watch a politician grow in stature and in confidence and in delivery, to borrow one of Rishi Sunak's catchphrases, but she delivers detail now, and if they're in opposition, they don't have to deliver detail, however many interviewers demand that they provide, balance sheets. It's a stupid question asked by silly people, but she bats that away fairly easily as well. They just look competent at the moment, and Christ, I'd take competent any day of the week.
Ross, the one that I suppose I have most reservations about is Yvette Cooper. Generally, because Home Secretary, it's not a lovable position. I remember writing a letter, I think in '94, to Tony Blair when he was Shadow Home Secretary.
I would love to have read that.
Going, what are you going to do about the crackdown on the criminal justice bill? Unsatisfactory response. But nice of him to respond. And I just feel those sort of vibes from Yvette Cooper, and I'm thinking that some of the worst things that the Tories have done that could be quickly reversed, like you can't really suddenly just go, we're doing HS2 anyway, but what you can do is repeal like protest restrictions, voter ID, like that's like super simple. Will she do it?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly some things that you can just plug onto another bill, and there will be an awful lot of bills being passed in that first year. And I imagine a voter ID in particular, I think will go. That's just not, it doesn't even work for the Tories. Why on earth Labour would keep it?
Maybe you answered your own question.
Labour voters get on too. Yeah, but it's for protest laws. Yeah, I mean, obviously, they should go. But I don't think they will. I don't think they will because I think Starmer himself is not really a libertarian when it comes to protest.
He's a cop.
Yeah, he's basically, I mean,
he's a what? He's a cop at heart. Like a friend said, the thing about Starmer is he's a cop.
A cop.
Yeah, he's a very responsible... responsible, caring.
I don't want to talk to him, but he is a cop.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cop, but a very responsible, caring, nice cop. But he is a cop, and you saw with Just Stop Oil.
Still hearing cop. Sorry.
And in his cop, you saw with Just Stop Oil that he's not, he's quite happy with those laws if it punishes people who he doesn't particularly approve of. Also, bear in mind what these protest laws do. They give big powers to the police and to the Home Secretary. Now, if you've got Yvette Cooper as Home Secretary, and for all your reservations about her, rather than Suella Braverman or Priti Patel or in James Cleverly, then you're probably a bit less worried about what the Home Secretary is going to do with those powers, should she wish to. And the police, clearly it's a worry, but they do fundamentally generally do what the government tells them to, with some obvious exceptions.
It's just a shame that people never really want to give away powers. Like, even if they wouldn't have introduced them, once they've got them, they're just like, but I will use them for good.
Yeah.
And then they think, as if then the other guys are never going to come back.
Yeah, of course they will, and then they'll abuse them again. But it's very hard for governments to give up powers once they abrogate them themselves. And that's why I don't think it's going to be a priority at all. So I'm sorry to let you down on that one, but no.
Alex, regular listeners, presumably some of them here, will know, my great affection for Ed Miliband, Lisa Nandy, Bridget Phillipson. They're always the ones that
they're the three that you fancy.
They're my bankers. Well, they've all been on the show. So that's basically that's good enough for me. I don't know what they believe in or what they do. they've been on the show. One of them actually came in person. No, but who sort of It was Bridget Phillipson. It was when she was backbencher, obviously. Not now. She wouldn't touch us with a barge pole now. Who do you like? Who you were sort of excited at seeing get their hands on a sort of government department and actually do the stuff that they've been wanting to do?
I quite like Yvette Cooper. I don't understand why she has a bad rap in this group. I think I can understand what you mean about her being quite, having a style that will work very well in opposition, but may grate when she's got the actual levers of power.
I just like Home Secretaries, basically.
But maybe she's smart enough to adjust to actually being in power and not be that person. And the thing about a lot of those laws, not the voter ID law, which I think they will do away with, but a lot of the protest laws, I mean, a lot of that stuff depends on what kind of steer you give to the police force. Most of it, no one decriminalized cannabis at any point, but there have been times when the government said, can you not prioritize that? We're not interested in people smoking one joint, just concentrate on this kind of thing. And so I think the sort of style of policing depends much more on the steer and culture that comes from the top, rather than the legislation that's on the statute
I think it'd be
books.
funny if when they got in, they just said, we're going to decriminalise weed, and the bust of Lenin has like a big sort of joint in its mouth.
I have
surprised, I think.
I've got some doubts about Liz Kendall, I'll be honest. I think her instincts are quite right-wing, and I think in the Department of Work and Pensions, she can do a lot of damage. Okay. And I would prefer someone more overtly empathetic in that position. I think Ed Miliband's going to have a really hard time because, net zero, he's going to be the one that's basically in everyone's face all the time. The nature of his brief is such that he will be getting involved in other people's departments all the time, and I think that's quite a difficult role. I also rate West Streeting very highly, by the way. What a backstory! I mean, bloody hell, everything but the hounds of hell snapping at his behind. And I do also think that the NHS does need serious reform. And you can't go into it with the NHS believing that this means we can just do the same thing, but they'll just give us loads more money. Because I don't think the country will wear that, actually. But, I think if we go back to what I was saying about, show us your workings, your priorities, I think what's gone massively wrong the last really 30 years is that...
That's what Rishi Sunak said.
I will disagree on the substance, though. You will. But it is that, this money is treated as sort of pocket money. It's like, how much do we have and where do we spend it? Instead of starting from the other end and saying, what does the citizen expect the state to deliver? How much will that cost? Where do I get the money? That's surely the right way around, right? And I see a lot of that in everything they say at the moment.
Ros, let's be honest, we're going to sort of complain about various decisions that they make, just to fill the episodes. But after 14 years of Tory dysfunction, it feels to me, I could be wrong, that it's going to feel like a new era regardless of sort of what they do, and even if it is a little bit underwhelming, and even if you think, you could have done more, you could be more inspiring, surely that kind of change, has to sort of feel inspiring anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the It's Time vibe, it's a change. No, absolutely. And, he will have a lot of goodwill, I think. And to a certain extent, it depends on the size of his majority. Not just in terms of getting winning votes, that's not so much the issue, but in terms of how much of a mandate he feels he has from all different sections of the British population. from Scotland, from Wales, from the Red Wall, which will hopefully be a wall again, from the Blue Wall, which hopefully won't be blue anymore. But how much he can actually claim to be speaking for the whole nation when he does things, and that will be partly what I think will be able to power
Well, that's
him.
another thing that's turned around, isn't it, since what people were saying in 2019 and before. It was like, well, you're not going to get Scotland. How are you going to win without Scotland?
Yeah.
And now Scotland's looking very, exciting. So, it's possible that you could get something where you've got spread across the region.
Yeah, and you can actually be one nation.
Gosh.
It's time. James, what's the vibe that you get from callers? Is there excitement about the prospect of a Labour government, or trepidation? Because you're speaking to people across the spectrum.
I don't think there's much excitement yet. You've got to be careful. I don't want to get myself into any trouble, but you do have to bear in mind that ringing a radio phone-in programme is not a terribly normal thing to do.
I was just feeling really happy. I was out with my mates, and I just thought I'd take a minute to call in.
It's the only way you'll take my calls now.
But it has over the years I've been doing it. It has become more and more normal, and there's nothing nicer than hearing someone on air who is palpably surprised to find themselves on the radio. They sort of speak to a producer and they get put through, and you can hear them sort of going, "Crikey, God, I've never done this before." And they're the ones I'm most interested in, because they're the ones who have been prompted to ring in by a change in their own political compass or a change in their own circumstances. And I think that the mood around Starmer is changing. I think that he will never win the hearts and minds of the all politicians are liars brigade, or they're all the same brigade. I think that is a narrative that suits the far right, actually, the idea that all politicians are the same, therefore there's no point engaging in democratic processes. And even when you do engage in a democratic process and he comes third, it's a fix, and ITV have been conspiring against you from the start to deny your man the victory that he so obviously deserved. But the idea of Starmer carrying a Ming vase across an ice rink, I think, took hold, and the cautiousness. I'll be honest, 52% genuine opinion and 48% optimism, or possibly the other way around. My favourite ratio. The idea that the caution is now beginning to make sense, I think, is actually catching on. I think that people don't want another bells and whistles person. I think that if he can continue with this portrayal of quiet competence, then it will be big come the next election.
And people whinge about him being, boring. But there'll be so much happening in that to talk about and fight about, obviously, and argue about. It's not going to be boring. It really isn't.
No, you're right.
No.
You're absolutely right.
It's going to be very exciting, especially for sad policy wonks like me.
So we want to get some of your questions. So we're going to do our Newsmakers of the Year quickly for me and James. Mine it's a bit obvious, but I have absolutely found it the most incredible spectacle, is Elon Musk's great unravelling. If you're saying what's interesting about Rishi Sunak is he's just walking through life like everything's going well, and then suddenly falls down a pothole lined with shite. Then that's Elon Musk, and he's just like, I proved myself, I am a genius, I want to change the world and take us to other planets and all that stuff. And he had for years people going, "Oh, sounds cool, okay." You seem to know what you're doing. And he's just been killed by Twitter. And somebody where Twitter hasn't always brought out the best in me. I love seeing someone who, if he was never on Twitter, never interested, let alone bought it, people would still just think, maybe we'll go to Mars. And so he's bought this thing, he's destroying it, all the advertisers would run off. He seems to have become a kind of omnidirectional bigot, to the point where I can't think of any group that he doesn't hate. Whereas before he was just this kind of boring sort of tech centrist, and now he just sort of hates everyone. And it's just watching the implosion of somebody that we were told was very, very important and very, very clever. And the fact that I'm still calling it Twitter and nobody cares. and that even when people call it X in print, they have to go, formerly Twitter, otherwise known as Twitter. And so you can't, even its rebrand, people are just going, no. And I enjoy failure on that scale, despite obviously the flood of anti-Semites and so on the site. I just loved it.
Yes.
Sean Freud away.
Has he destroying Twitter, or has Twitter destroyed him?
What's the third amazing noise? It's like, where did you find this new material? There's a little bit of kind of sub-bass. James, your newsmaker.
I just quick on the rebrand. I love it. It reminds me of a guy at college who gave himself the nickname Fonzie. And literally nobody except him ever called him Fonzie. So he'd arrive in the bar and go, all right, guys, Fonzie's here. And we'd all go, all right, John. That's what's happened. That's what's happened with Twitter and X. Can I change mine? Because I was going to do Ules, which I think we touched on in the first.
Sure, yeah, you can. Whatever.
So I'll choose Gary Lineker because the man can't break.
Very topical.
And also he can't break wind without making front page news. It is absolutely extraordinary, and it's a lot more significant than I think people realise. We haven't really touched upon it at all tonight, but all of the people we're talking about who have votes still rely in large part on what the print media or legacy media or established media is telling them, whether you're swimming against it or pushing back against it, or whether you're being manipulated and influenced or informed perhaps occasionally by it. And there's two stories out there. There's this idea that does have enormous hold across Fleet Street, from the Telegraph right down to the Sun, or up to the Sun these days, that there is a sort of massive liberal conspiracy, that there are loads of very, very influential people, you could call them the new elites or the tofu-eating woke. Yes, the anti-growth coalition over there in the corner. Sane people. It's great to see you here tonight. And yet...
Is anybody here woke?
And yet when you actually say to people, OK, make me a list of the prominent liberal voices in this country who have a significantly sized platform which they are paid to use to promote liberal thought. So you can't include people who use Twitter, which would be Gary Lineker and Carol Vorderman. That's it. They're people with a big platform. As in everything they do is newsworthy because of the things they've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. On the right-wing side of it, we could be here all night listing, from Little John, Little Murray, all of them. I mean, there's 30 off the top. I work with 5. Actually 2 now. It used to be 5. And yet when you ask that...
If I was the other 2, I'd be worried.
I'm working. No.
It's great when you see a bus and it's your face and then these guys on the side of it.
Yes. Some of them are all right. The point being that it doesn't exist. It's an astonishing bogus victimhood coupled with conspiracy theory, that there are these armies of hugely influential leftist media figures who are skewing the debate and ignoring the interests of ordinary working people and eschewing British values at every turn. And that is why Gary Lineker is such a significant... He's literally the only one they can think of and the only one they can find. He says something completely... Yesterday's Daily Mail, or the day before... It had, alongside each other, it had a story about how everybody in the Tory party is criticising the Rwanda policy. Every single person, except those that are bound by collective cabinet responsibility. And even some of them are kind of hinting at it. And then on the next page, it was 6 and 7, Lineker was on the front page for criticising the Rwanda policy. And these are the moments where you think the madness has completely taken hold now. You're down with Gary Lineker for criticising the Rwanda policy. Oh, what do you think of the Rwanda? Oh, I think it's shit.
Well, the big story was that he'd been mean about Grant Shapps, and it was just like, if that's a crime, then lock us all up,
And he hadn't even been that mean. He just pointed pointed out two things. Number one, that Grant Shapps has been known by at least 3 other names in the commercial world while he made money flogging get-rich-quick schemes on the internet under false names. That is a matter of fact. And the other thing he pointed out, which literally nobody possessed of a single brain cell could dispute, is that Jonathan Gullis is very stupid.
Well, we'd love to get on to questions, so thank you first for coming along or watching from afar. Without you, well, James would be fine, but the rest of us, we'd just be ranting at home to our families. I think we pretty much covered everything one could possibly wonder about British politics, but if there are questions, please, there's a man with a microphone.
There is a microphone. Is it on?
And because
is the microphone on? There's a microphone
we'd like to get through as much as possible.
I'm going to give this guy a go because he's got a Christmas jumper which has got the top Christmas top 10 from 1980. What? 1980 old. Here we go.
Okay.
You talked about the vibes that we need to bring with Labour and the idea that hope is something that we need to look forward to. My question is, what can we learn from the experience of Obama and post-Obama?
Good question.
Jesus Christ, what is going... You put a quarter in them!
I think Alex has kind of answered it. You've got to come out of the traps really, really quickly. I mean, I think that with Obama, I have a sense that he thought, I'm going to get around to that soon. And then he never did. And I think that, as Alex has explained, Starmer needs to come out of the traps very, very fast and do a lot. That would be one lesson to learn from the Obama experience.
Well, looking at, I'm just looking at, obviously, Biden now, and vibes are everything. Because if you actually look at what people think about the state of the US economy versus what the numbers say about the US economy, and I know that's not exactly, the same thing, the numbers alone can't tell you if some people are struggling. But there's a vast gulf. And Biden was someone that just came in and went, I won't be crazy like that guy. Yeah. And he did that. He has not been crazy like that guy. And yet, people are kind of like, oh, I don't like how things are going. Maybe we'll let that guy back again. Maybe he's learned his lesson. The thing is, there's no foolproof way to sort of get through, to get that new sort of hegemony and keep those guys out. So, so you don't want to overpromise, because I feel maybe perhaps Obama, he said hope and change and there wasn't enough of it. Yeah. You also want to kind of really get stuff done. And in America, the problem is that Biden, of course, is being thwarted again and again by, problems in Congress and,
And I think Obama lost the...
Yeah,
Obama lost the Senate halfway through his first term.
You basically get about 2 years,
Yeah.
Whereas with first past the post, God bless it, if you win a big majority, you can do a lot. And so... That encourages me more, and I think it really matters. What I wouldn't want is just a very narrow win, which would mean that he just couldn't deliver that sort of change.
Yeah, you've got to give the impression of agency. You've got to give the impression that you can change things. I think that is ultimately Biden's problem. For a start, people always, unfortunately, the narrative is, well, he's very old and he might die soon, okay? He's done some great things, don't get me wrong. Only this week he's announced his intention to ban lead water pipes in America, which is a massive thing because lead water pipes are really, really bad. They cut IQ by an insane number of points.
That explains a lot.
Jonathan Gullis' house. Check it out. It's got lead brick.
But Obama, as you say, was hampered by the way the system works in the US and the opposition, and from the you've got to be making the running and have people believe that you are capable of changing things. And in that sense, Starmer has got off to a good start because we have seen how quickly he has been able to turn around the reputation and electability of the Labour Party. So that's promising.
Have another question?
Yeah, we're trying to be less centrist, so we'll go over to the extreme wings. Here you go.
He's picking his part.
This is a continuation of the theme.
I literally can't see anything.
Okay, there.
Is Donald Trump the elephant in the room? How might he impact the next election? I'm not 100% sure about how the dates coincide.
Right, because that is a big problem, because the effect that Donald Trump will have on world events. I mean, Republicans are already trying to throw Ukraine under the bus. Trump definitely would. He will, where he would stand on climate change treaties and things like that. So that's a whole load of stuff that, quite apart from the, I'd imagine, chilly relationship between Starmer and Trump personally, there would be a load of problems that Britain would then have to deal with, and would lose an ally on many points. I still think Trump won't win. But I've been right. I've been wrong once and right once. So this is the tiebreaker.
It's going to create a great feeling of insecurity in Europe if he wins, and if he pulls out of NATO, as he's always threatening to do, and if he basically says the US is no longer guaranteeing your security in Europe, that is going to create an absolute, spasm of fear. Because, of course, of Putin and what he might choose to do. So, that will be, I think, the first thing that he will probably, the first concrete thing that he will have to deal with. What does a NATO without the US look like? How can it be? And this is an advantage in a way that Starmer will have over Sunak, because he, I think, will be open to some sort of European force. I won't say army, because the word army scares people. Yeah. But some sort of force which we could be a part of and work with, which will not necessarily, it can't be the EU, because we won't be in the EU at that time, but will give a feeling of security to Europeans. So that may well be his first challenge.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, two things. I think the Serbian leader this week has essentially said all we've got to do is hang on until the American presidential election. So these particularly pungent authoritarians across Europe see Trump as being the dream ticket that is going to give them the legitimacy to hang on to power, not just across Europe, possibly in parts of the Middle East as well. And on the force thing, I never understood that. It was a Farage thing, wasn't it? We're going to have a European army, and everyone had a fit of the vapours and clutched their pearls. And you always wanted to sort of grab them by the ears and say, the armies that you need to be afraid of are not the armies that you're in. Bit of a history lesson for you.
Make you think.
I mean, I would agree with that. I would also say, I would agree with you. I don't think Trump will be elected.
Really?
I don't know why this is such a controversial issue.
It's interesting.
His campaign hasn't even begun yet, and I think his popularity within his party massively skews notions of his popularity outside it. But as I've said, I think Biden won't run. I think someone else will run. I think they'll sucker them into Trump and then replace Biden with someone much sort of more dynamic. I didn't want to say that.
Ageism in this room, man.
I also think there is no reason in 2023 that Europe should constantly be looking to the United States for moral leadership and protection. I mean, let's put our big boy pants on.
Okay.
And if there's one thing that might push the UK actually back into the bosom of Europe a lot quicker than most people think, it might be a Trump presidency.
Ooh, that's a real kind of that's a monkey's paw shit, isn't it? It's like, I want to rejoin the European Union. And it's like, oh no! Okay, we'll try and be quick with the answers. Is there anyone else out there?
We've got time for two more, and it's all been blokes so far. So here's somebody who's not a bloke.
Okay.
Hello, I'm the sort of weirdo that often phones into radio stations. I'm a teacher. I'm usually here banging on about the state of education and the suffering of children in our country, the fact that they're cold, they haven't got enough to eat, a lot of them. Do you think Labour gets how serious the situation is? Because the education system is collapsing around our ears. And are they going to get spendy soon enough to fix it before all the teachers leave?
I don't be too much Team Phillipson about this, but I think she's somebody who does get it, and it's partly her background, her personality, concerns. I think that's the right person to be doing this. But like you said, it's a huge question of resources. But I'm comforted by the idea that somebody that actually cares about their sector, as opposed to kind of musical chairs that we've had over recent years, where it's like Gavin Williamson.
Sir Gavin
Williamson. Obviously couldn't give a shit if children lived or died, essentially. And so I feel like it's the right person that will be coming into it. Whether they've got the resources is an open question.
But that's the point, isn't it? Everything is falling apart. There's all those competing things. But I also think there is value to a country that doesn't get its head down, that something happens and you think, well, it's improving. That is a big thing, to know that the light at the end of the tunnel is not a flamethrower, which has been the case with the Tory party all the time. You think, it can't get worse than this, surely. And then Johnson happens, and then you think, well, it can't get worse. And then Truss happens. And so I think, there's not some divorced reality of a group over there that rebuilds the country. A group over there with proper leadership has the opportunity to inspire us to rebuild the country. And that's what's lacking at the moment. There is no sense that we are in this together.
I'd add one thing to that, which I think addresses directly part of your question, and that is that we're living through an era of extraordinary poverty denial. There are people who genuinely don't believe, they cannot grasp the concept of running out of money before you've run out of month. And you don't have to be, you can be a billionaire and understand what it is like to have 3 days left of the month and 1 tin of beans in the cupboard and no money for the electricity meter. And people like, most obviously I suppose, Rayner and Streeting, obviously understand that. Starmer understands that. And that has to be the starting point for the kind of change that you're talking about. The thing that, many things shocked me, but one of the things that shocked me most this year was the juxtaposition of poverty denial. People in public life who would profess absolute disbelief at the idea that of what was called hygiene poverty, the idea that people were running out of soap or running out of shampoo. And so what you do if you're a certain type of columnist or broadcaster is you Google soap and you find a bar of soap for sale for 50p and you say, well, how can anybody not have 50p to spend on a bar of soap? It's absolute bollocks and it's all nonsense and they're all lying and swinging their lead and they're probably spending it on special brew and flat screen television. and so poverty doesn't exist. Everybody can afford everything. They just need to make better lifestyle choices. And then they announced that they were going to abolish the VAT breaks on private school fees. And suddenly poverty was real. Suddenly, these people need help. They need, and I'm one of them. We need support.
Well, nobody think of the A1s.
Thank you.
Suddenly,
money for eating.
Extraordinary. And you hear it, you watch it, it's a straight face. You need money for soap, fuck off. You need money for school fees. Christ on a bike, how much? Where do I start? It's unbelievable.
But James, some of them will have to be educated in state schools. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, think about that for a moment. After what the Tories have done to them.
Yes. Oh gosh, yes.
To think they made a film about Dunkirk when there's a story like this that has not been told.
We've got one more question.
One more question for the man who has his arm up for such a long time it might fall off. Here we go.
What are you getting Ian Dump for Christmas?
You you answer that.
Does Ian even
a
do
deadline? Actually, we're working on something together, so I'm just going to give him a load of work, and that will teach him to leave the podcast. I think he's here. Is he here? Okay, yeah, so...
He's probably left after the first half.
He's already read Atlas Shrugged, but he hasn't read The Fountain. So, I'll get him that, and maybe some action figures. Ayn Rand action figures.
Some cooking classes wouldn't go amiss. I still see abortions posted on his Instagram occasionally.
Well, that's just a very poetic note to end on. Thank you to the Comedy Store for hosting. This was very exciting being here. Thanks also to our listeners and Patreon backers, and because of you, the team keeps growing. So thank you to that team: Adam, Alex, Andrew, Anne-Marie, Chris, Eliza, Jacob, Jade, Jess, Jim, Kieran, Liam, Martin, Mike, Robin, and Simon. I imagine they're all just the children of a big thing.
Jacob Rees-Moggs.
Jacob Rees-Moggs. Please meet my children. Obviously, they have normal names. And also, thank you to our fabulous panel, Alex. Wonderful guest, James O'Brien.
And our host, Dorian Linsky.
Merry Christmas, God bless us everyone.